Hi, I'm Becca Reed.
I'm Lexio Domrock.
I'm Sergio Cornejo.
I'm Mary Margaret Haywood.
I'm Andy Doris. And today we're going to answer the question, why study Africa?
Poverty and apartheid.
I think of poverty and political unrest.
As you can see, most of these answers are very stereotypical answers of what many Americans think about Africa. In the first chapter of Mistaking Africa, Keim gives an overview of how American culture has given us a distorted view of Africa and why. All of the points in this first chapter revolve around the central thesis that Americans do not know that much about Africa or African culture. And what little we do know is not always the whole truth. Keim gives many examples to support his thesis that Americans do not know the complete truth or information there is to know about Africa. He says that we get our ideas and understanding from sly comments and jokes made about Africa, and they are assumed to be true.
Many of our misconceptions about Africa are the result of only hearing what American media has to say about Africa. Keim's Mistaking Africa supports this argument by talking about American media and how it only chooses to report information that they view as relevant. For example, we are more likely to hear about a failure in African culture rather than a success story. There are gaps in our information that we tend to fill up with our imaginations and stereotypes, which he calls exoticism. He goes on to say that we fill the voids with these misconceptions because we tend to assume that people are much more different than they are similar to us.
Nature programs, cartoons, and news reports on television that revolve around Africa also contribute to our obscured views. Most of the nature programs in the 1940s and 50s would show Africa as wild animals, park rangers, and naturalists who battle against poachers and enriching agriculture. This stereotype is simply untrue because of the African residents never encounter such wild animals. Most of the residents live in towns or cities where there is a large human population. In addition, many cartoons tend to show many African stereotypes, such as ferocious large animals and hungry cannibals. These are also false, just as the stereotypes in the cartoons are false.
News reports portraying Africa tend to be even worse than nature shows or cartoons. The media is focused more on making a scene and luring the viewing audience into believing a story than telling or showing the honest truth. In Keim's article, we find that it's hard for news reporters to get inside the city where most of the true Africans reside or live their everyday lives than it is to film in the rural areas of Africa. Thus, we only see what happens in the lesser populated places and do not get the whole picture. This helps contribute to our minute and false knowledge on African way of life. Also, when news about Africa is on television, there tends to be some negative aspects present like war, drought, famine, flood, or accident. These types of events are reported most often because it's sure to catch the viewer's attention. Therefore, these television portrayals are inaccurate and show that we only learn what we want to learn, and that we like our picture of Africans the way it is now. These are just a few of the ways that Americans get their information about Africa.
After realizing that most of our information about Africa comes from these types of sources, we decided to ask some students about their education on Africa in school.
Compared to other countries, I did not learn about it that much.
Not a lot compared to other countries.
As you can see, most students in America are not educated about Africa as much as they are other countries, like European countries and America. In one of Keim's first supporting paragraphs in his first chapter of Mistaking Africa, he describes that when a sample of college students were asked some word association questions about Africa, many of them indeed did use words like tribal, jungle, wild animals, hut, shield, warrior, savage, cannibals, witch doctor, and pyramid. Keim referred to this as real but unintentional racism. Although the people in this survey, along with people around the nation, do not intend for their words to be racist or hurtful, they are, and it is still racist to someone living in Africa. These obscured images or ideas are often what we refer to as stereotypes, and they begin in our schools. Today, many American school curriculums do not cover much about Africa, and the ones that do are not always completely accurate. Thus, America is generally very uneducated or misinformed when it comes to the topic of Africa.
In Chapter 2 of Mistaking Africa, Keim explains that many social studies teachers in America still do not have accurate information about Africa. The overall thesis of this chapter is that current teachings and textbooks about Africa are not based on what is actually true, but rather what the authors and teachers think is true. These educators are using outdated and inaccurate information about Africa, ideas that come from myths, television, movies, print media, word of mouth, etc., rather than the scholarly data that is available. One of the first arguments Keim makes in the opening of the chapter is about how even America's teachers think about Africa based on stereotypes. He says, in a 1996 study of pre-service social studies teachers, 82% thought there were tigers in Africa. 94% believed wild animals were common everywhere on the continent. 74% understood most Africans to be illiterate. And 93% were convinced that more kinds of diseases exist in Africa than in Asia and South America. He explains that the main reason many people think this way is because we look at Africa through American glasses, or what popular culture makes us think about Africa.
Today's modern universities pursue an international curriculum by encouraging students to learn foreign languages, study in universities abroad, and steep themselves in history and culture of other nations. Africa should be included in this educational system because Africa can be justified as well as any other nation. For all of these reasons, we think it is important that we study Africa to correct the misconceptions and gain accurate knowledge about this continent.